picture a doctor's office. There's a man in robes holding a flask of yellowish liquid up to the light. He's swirling it slowly. He smells it. He nods. He tastes it. He tells you what's wrong with you. You have too much blood. He's going to fix that. This is medieval medicine. It is a complete, internally consistent, rigorously applied system for treating human illness. It was also catastrophically, confidently, and almost entirely wrong. For roughly 1,000 years, across an entire continent. This isn't a story about ignorance. The people who ran this system were educated, dedicated, and often very intelligent. This is a story about what happens when a theory is so elegant that nobody checks if it's true. Let's go through it, section by section. Starting with the foundation everything else was built on. Section 1. The four humors. In the 5th century BC, the Greek physician Hippocrates proposed that the human body was governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was the balance of these four fluids. Illness was their imbalance. Every symptom mapped to a humor. Every treatment aimed to restore equilibrium. 6 centuries later, the physician Galen of Pergamon took this system, refined it, expanded it, and wrote about it so comprehensively that his works became the medical Bible of the ancient world, and then the medieval world, and then the early modern world. Galen died in approximately High Chimsao AD. His system ran European medicine until the 17th century. That's 1,400 years on a theory that was never experimentally tested. Here's the system. Blood is hot and wet. It comes from the liver. Too much blood, and you're flushed, energetic, possibly overheated. Not enough, and you're pale and weak. Phlegm is cold and wet. It comes from the brain. Too much phlegm, and you're sluggish, dull, and prone to colds. Yellow bile is hot and dry. It comes from the gallbladder. Excess yellow bile makes you aggressive and feverish. Black bile is cold and dry. It comes from the spleen. Too much black bile, and you're melancholy, anxious, and depressed. The word melancholy comes from the Greek words for black bile. The word phlegmatic, meaning calm to the point of sluggishness, comes from phlegm. Humoral theory is still embedded in the English language. It also dictated your diet, your environment, your daily routine, and every medical decision made about your body for over a millennium. Each season had a dominant humor. Each food affected the humoral balance. A physician didn't just treat your symptoms. He prescribed which vegetables to eat based on their inherent temperatures and moistures, what time to wake up, which direction to face while sleeping. The theory explained everything. That was the problem. When a theory explains everything, it can be contradicted by nothing. Every patient who recovered was proof the theory worked. Every patient who died had simply been too far out of balance to save. Nobody went looking for a better theory. They had a perfect one. Section 2. Uroscopy. The single most common diagnostic tool in medieval medicine was a flask of urine. Uroscopy, the examination of urine for medical information, was practiced in ancient Mesopotamia, refined by Islamic physicians, and became absolutely central to European medieval medicine. Every physician carried a uroscopy wheel, an illustrated chart showing 20 or so urine samples in different colors, from pale white to deep brown, each one labeled with its corresponding diagnosis and recommended treatment. You didn't need to examine the patient. You needed the urine. This was not a fringe practice. This was mainstream. Court cases in medieval England document physicians being asked to testify about a patient's condition based solely on a sample brought to them in a flask. Wealthy patients employed urine messengers, people whose job was to carry urine flasks across town to the physician's house, so the physician didn't have to leave his office. The physician would hold the flask to the light, swirl it, observe the color, note the sediment, sometimes smell it, sometimes, in some documented cases, taste it. He would then compare what he observed to his uroscopy wheel and deliver his verdict. Some of this wasn't entirely useless. Dark concentrated urine does indicate dehydration. Cloudy urine can indicate infection. Sweet-smelling urine is a genuine indicator of diabetes, excess glucose spilling into the urine. Medieval physicians hit that one correctly without knowing why. But the uroscopy wheel went considerably further. Different shades of yellow diagnosed problems with specific organs. White urine indicated a cold humor. Red urine, blood in the urine, which is a medical emergency, was often read as a humor imbalance to be corrected with diet. The system was applied with complete confidence to conditions it had no ability to diagnose. One Mortnum-le-Sau medical pamphlet shows a physician examining a urine flask, while the patient is clearly a mannequin held by a woman in the background. The physician isn't looking at the patient at all. The flask is the patient. Section 3. Bloodletting. If uroscopy was how medieval medicine diagnosed you, bloodletting was how it treated you. The premise: too much blood, or blood that had become corrupt, heated, or otherwise imbalanced, needed to be removed. The procedure: a physician or barber-surgeon opened a vein, usually at the inner elbow, the neck, or behind the ear, and collected the blood in a bowl until he decided enough had been removed. How much was enough? It depended on the humor being addressed, the patient's constitution, the season, and, this is important, the position of the moon. Specific veins corresponded to specific conditions. A vein on the left arm was bled for liver problems. A vein behind the ear was bled for head pain. A vein on the foot was bled for digestive complaints. Manuals for bleeding were standard equipment for any practicing physician. The Almanac of Morton-born Bami Mote includes detailed diagrams of the human body with arrows indicating which vein to open for which ailment. Bloodletting was performed on healthy patients as preventive medicine. It was performed seasonally, the way we might think about getting a flu shot. It was performed on pregnant women, on children, on the elderly. It was performed on plague patients as the primary treatment. The red and white striped pole outside a barber shop, that's this. The red represents bloody bandages. The white represents the tourniquet. The pole itself represents the stick patients gripped to make their veins stand out. It's a medical instrument advertisement that's been decorating barber shops for 600 years. Now, here's the thing about bloodletting. It killed people. Not always. Occasionally, in narrow circumstances, removing blood genuinely helps. Certain conditions cause excess red blood cell production, and phlebotomy is still used for them today. But the vast majority of bloodletting performed between Nam-Cham and Mutnin-Tam AD was either useless or actively harmful. George Washington died in Mutnin-Bait-Chin-Michin. He developed a severe throat infection, possibly epiglottitis. In the 14 hours before his death, his physicians removed approximately Bacham Baimi Lum liters of blood. That's roughly 1% of the total blood volume in a human body. Modern scholars largely attribute his death to the treatment rather than the original infection. Washington died in Morton by Chimachin. The medieval period ended in Motnin Numtap. Bloodletting survived it by 300 years. Section 4. The barber-surgeon. Here's something that takes a moment to absorb. In medieval Europe, the people who performed surgery were barbers, not as a sideline, not informally. Officially, legally, formally, as their designated guild function. The barber-surgeon was a recognized trade. He cut hair. He shaved beards. He pulled teeth. He lanced abscesses. He bled patients. He amputated limbs. The reason for this arrangement was class. University-trained physicians diagnosed. They advised. They prescribed. They did not touch patients. That was considered manual labor, and manual labor was beneath a learned man. The actual physical procedures were assigned to a lower tier of practitioner. The barber-surgeon had no university training. He learned through apprenticeship. He worked at market stalls, at fairs, in the back rooms of bathhouses. He pulled a tooth with a specialized iron instrument and no anesthetic. He amputated a gangrenous limb with a saw, a knife, and ideally some wine for the patient, not enough to work as an anesthetic, enough to reduce the coherent screaming to incoherent screaming. Speed was the only mercy in amputation. A skilled barber-surgeon could remove a leg below the knee in under 2 minutes. This is not a statistic designed to impress you with skill. It's a statistic that tells you what 2 minutes in that chair felt like. The wound was then sealed. The preferred method in earlier periods was cauterization, a heated iron applied to the stump. Later, some surgeons adopted ligatures, tying off the blood vessels. The French surgeon Ambroise Paré, in the 16th century, championed ligatures over cauterization after running out of boiling oil during a battlefield amputation and discovering the wounds healed better without it. He also advocated for cleaning wounds rather than pouring burning substances into them. He was largely ignored by the profession. The London Guild of Barber-Surgeons was formally established in Morthin Namchambonmwe under Henry VIII. Its coat of arms included a severed arm holding a lancet. They were proud of this. Section 5. Trepanation. Medieval physicians drilled holes in people's skulls while they were awake. Trepanation, the removal of a disc of skull bone using a drill, a scraper, or a saw, is actually one of the oldest documented medical procedures in human history. Neolithic skulls from Sao-Nam BC show evidence of trepanation. By the medieval period, it was a recognized treatment for epilepsy, severe headaches, skull fractures with bone depression, and, most medievally, the release of evil vapors thought to cause madness. The procedure, the patient was positioned and held. The physician cut through the scalp. He then used a trephine, a circular drill with a central spike, to bore through the skull. The goal was to remove a disc of bone without puncturing the membrane beneath. A surgeon who went too deep killed the patient. A surgeon who didn't go deep enough hadn't finished the job. There was no general anesthetic. Patients were given alcohol, and sometimes preparations containing henbane or other plants with sedative properties. This helped. It didn't help enough. Here is the genuinely remarkable thing. It worked. Sometimes. Archaeological examination of medieval and pre-medieval skulls shows bone regrowth around trepanation sites, meaning patients survived, often for years after the procedure. Some skulls show multiple trepanations. A patient who survived one hole in the skull apparently sometimes came back for another. When trepanation was performed on genuine skull fractures, with depressed bone pressing on the brain, the procedure correctly identified and treated the problem. The medieval physician was right that pressure needed to be relieved. He was wrong about the evil vapors, but occasionally being right for wrong reasons still saved a patient. Most of the time it didn't. Section 6. Theriac. Medieval medicine had a universal remedy. It was called theriac. It contained up to 80 ingredients. One of them was viper flesh. Theriac's origins trace to Mithridates VI of Pontus, a king who was so afraid of being poisoned that he spent years systematically exposing himself to small doses of various poisons to build immunity. He also developed an antidote he believed would work against any poison. This antidote passed through the ancient world, was refined by Galen, and became theriac, the compound medicine that medieval physicians prescribed for everything. The recipe varied, but a serious theriac contained viper flesh, dried opium, cinnamon, rose petals, saffron, beaver testicles. Genuinely, they were believed to have medical properties, pepper, honey, and several dozen other ingredients in precise proportions. A proper theriac took months to prepare and required formal aging. You couldn't rush theriac. It was supposed to improve with age, like wine. Venice controlled the most prestigious theriac production in Europe. Venetian theriac was made publicly, with officials watching, to guarantee its authenticity. Forgeries existed. People paid heavily for the real thing. Theriac was prescribed for plague, fever, snakebite, general poisoning, and as a general preventive tonic. Physicians gave it to themselves. Kings took it daily. Modern pharmacological analysis of theriac finds exactly one active ingredient doing any real medical work: the opium. The opium reduced pain, induced calm, and made patients feel better in the short term. Everything else was elaborate placebo. But here is the thing about a placebo that makes you feel better in the short term. Patients who felt better reported that the treatment worked. Physicians who prescribed it saw improvement. The feedback loop confirmed the theory. Nobody examined what happened 6 months later. Section 7. Astrological medicine. Medieval medicine and astrology were not two separate subjects. They were one subject. Every planet governed a body part. Saturn governed the spleen. Jupiter governed the liver. Mars governed the gallbladder. The moon governed the brain. Each zodiac sign ruled a region of the body, from Aries governing the head down to Pisces governing the feet. The zodiac man, Homo signorum, was a diagram showing the human body with each body part labeled by its corresponding sign. This diagram appeared in nearly every medieval medical manuscript. It was not decorative. It was clinical reference material. Before a physician bled a patient, he consulted the astrological calendar. Bleeding the wrong vein during the wrong planetary position was considered medically dangerous. Not spiritually dangerous. Medically dangerous. The position of Saturn could impair the healing of wounds. The phase of the moon affected the humors. Blood was believed to increase during a full moon, making it a dangerous time for certain procedures. A physician who scheduled a bloodletting without checking the stars was negligent by the standards of the profession. A Motba Chinmihai medical manual by John of Ardern, a respected English surgeon, includes detailed astrological tables for procedure timing alongside anatomical drawings. He was one of the most sophisticated surgeons of his era. He included the star charts as a matter of course. This is not the exception. This is the medical consensus of the period, written down, taught in universities, and applied to patients across Europe. Section 8. The Plague Doctor. In Mortain ba Bombay, the Black Death arrived in Sicily on a Genoese trading ship. Within 3 years, it had killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Medieval medicine had no answer. Humoral theory could not explain why entire villages emptied in a week. It could not explain why physicians who bled their plague patients watched them die faster. It could not explain why the infection seemed to spread through contact in ways that had nothing to do with humoral imbalance. For perhaps the first time, the theory was colliding with something so large and so fast that the gaps were impossible to ignore. The official responses were, burn aromatic herbs in the streets to counter bad air, bleed patients to rebalance the humors, carry pomanders, small balls of fragrant herbs, to breathe through, and quietly flee. The beak mask is real. The long wax-coated coat is real. The wide-brimmed hat, the glass eye coverings, the wooden staff to avoid touching patients, all real. And the beak was not symbolic. It was stuffed with aromatic herbs, lavender, rose petals, camphor, dried flowers, because the prevailing theory said disease traveled through corrupted air, miasma, and breathing through purified air would filter the contagion. This is wrong. Bubonic plague is transmitted by flea bites and, in its pneumonic form, by respiratory droplets. Breathing through lavender does not prevent it. But here is the thing, it wasn't magic. It wasn't superstition. It was applied science within an incorrect framework. The physicians had a theory about how disease transmitted. They built protective equipment based on that theory. The equipment was the wrong design for the actual pathogen, but the instinct that something in the environment was causing disease and could be blocked was pointing in a real direction. The physicians who stayed died. The ones who fled survived and came back. Cities hired whoever would agree to treat the sick. The plague doctor of popular imagination, often young, often inexperienced, working under contract for a city government, was frequently not the established physician. He was whoever said yes. Many said yes. Many died. The plague did not destroy humoral theory. After it passed, physicians analyzed why it had failed and concluded that patients must have had extreme pre-existing humoral imbalances, or that the miasma had been unusually powerful. The theory explained the failure as a more extreme version of itself. This is what happens when a theory can't be falsified. It doesn't get replaced by the evidence. It absorbs the evidence. Section 9. What actually worked. This section is shorter than the others. Some medieval medicine worked, not because the theory was correct, but because certain practices happened to align with genuine biological effects. Willow bark tea was prescribed for pain and fever. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin. It works. Medieval physicians prescribed it for the right symptoms with a completely wrong explanation. But patients who took it felt better because the chemistry was real. Honey-based wound dressings were common. Honey has genuine antibacterial properties due to its low water content, acidity, and the presence of hydrogen peroxide. Medieval wounds dressed with honey healed better than wounds left open. The mechanism was unknown. The result was real. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and medical writer, produced extensive herbal guides based on systematic observation of which plants produced which effects in patients. Some of her recommendations are pharmacologically defensible. Her approach, watching what actually happened to patients rather than just applying theory, occasionally produced correct conclusions. The problem was that isolated correct conclusions couldn't challenge the overall framework. A physician who noticed that willow bark reduced fever didn't conclude that humoral theory was wrong. He concluded that willow bark addressed a hot, dry humor imbalance. The correct observation was reabsorbed into the incorrect system. Section 10. The moment it started changing. In Mortnambonba, the Flemish physician Andreas Vesalius published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, a comprehensive atlas of human anatomy based on actual dissection of human cadavers. Galen's anatomy had been based largely on the dissection of pigs and Barbary apes. When Vesalius opened human bodies, he found that Galen was wrong about the jaw, wrong about the breastbone, wrong about the liver, wrong about the heart, wrong about the blood vessels. He documented over 200 errors. The medical establishment's response: Vesalius must be wrong. Human bodies must have changed since Galen's time. Galen had said there were holes between the chambers of the heart, and if Vesalius couldn't find them, he wasn't looking carefully enough. William Harvey, in Mothin Sauheimitam, demonstrated that blood circulates, that the heart pumps it continuously around the body rather than the liver producing new blood constantly, as Galen had stated. This was correct. It was demonstrated experimentally. The profession rejected it for decades. The shift from humoral theory to evidence-based medicine took approximately 150 years after Vesalius. Bloodletting continued as a common treatment into the 19th century, past the American Revolution, past the Napoleonic Wars, into the era of railways and telegraphs. The last formal recognition of barber-surgeons as a medical guild wasn't ended until Motnin Bonmilam in England. These things don't end cleanly. They end because each generation trains the next, and the next generation has slightly better tools, slightly more data, and slightly less reverence for the previous generation's certainty. The shift is not dramatic. It's 1,000 small moments of someone looking at a patient, looking at the theory, and saying, these two things don't match. Conclusion: medieval medicine failed not because of stupidity, but because of certainty. The physicians who ran this system were often highly educated, intellectually serious people. They had a complete theory. It explained blood and bile, stars and seasons, diet and disease. It had been endorsed by the greatest medical minds of the ancient world and the authority of the Church. It had 1,000 years of clinical practice behind it. The only thing it didn't have was a mechanism to be proved wrong. That's the lesson buried in 1,400 years of bloodletting and uroscopy wheels and beak masks stuffed with lavender. A theory that can explain anything explains nothing. Medicine got better the moment it made a rule. If the evidence contradicts the theory, you change the theory. It sounds obvious. It took 1,000 years to become policy. You should probably be glad you live now. Subscribe if you'd like more history that permanently changes how you think about the things we take for granted. New video next week.